The boarding doors were closing, sealing 280 passengers inside a Boeing 787 that was mechanically doomed. Standing on the jet bridge, holding the absolute federal authority to ground the flight, was Nadine Croft. But the airport security supervisor actively blocking her path didn't see the FAA's lead aviation safety investigator. He only saw a black woman in civilian clothes he had already decided didn't belong. What followed wasn't just a clash of egos, it was a terrifying high-stakes standoff that would permanently end careers, expose a massive corporate cover-up, and prove exactly why you never judge a book by its cover. The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport Terminal D buzzed with the frantic, low-level hum of thousands of people trying to be somewhere else. It was 4:15 p.m. on a stormy Tuesday, and the weather delays were already cascading through the departure boards like falling dominoes. Nadine Croft didn't care about the weather. She cared about a piece of paper, specifically a falsified maintenance log for a Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner bearing the tail number N774AL. Nadine walked with the kind of purposeful, invisible speed that only seasoned federal agents possess. At 42, she was the Federal Aviation Administration's lead aviation safety inspector for critical incidents. When planes crashed, Nadine was the one who sifted through the wreckage. When airlines tried to cut corners and hide critical mechanical failures, Nadine was the one who showed up unannounced, federal badge in hand, to shut them down before a tragedy could happen. Today she was operating strictly on a no-notice mandate. Meridian Airlines Flight 144 to Frankfurt was scheduled to push back from Gate D22 in exactly 45 minutes. Less than an hour ago, a whistleblower from the airline's maintenance hangar had forwarded Nadine a set of encrypted files. The left main landing gear's hydraulic actuator on N774AL had failed a pressure test the night before. Instead of grounding the multi-million-dollar aircraft and taking a massive financial hit, a senior maintenance director had forged the sign-off sheet. If that plane took off, the pressure differential at 35,000 feet would likely rupture the weakened seal completely. Upon landing in Frankfurt, the left gear would collapse, sending 280 passengers and crew skidding into a catastrophic, fiery debris field. Nadine carried a heavy black Pelican 1510 case containing specialized diagnostic equipment and her federal lockdown tags. She wore dark slacks, a crisp white button-down, and a tailored navy blazer. Clipped to her belt was her FAA Form 110A, credential the golden ticket of aviation. It granted her unrestricted access to any commercial aircraft, jet bridge cockpit, or tarmac in the United States. She bypassed the snaking line of frustrated passengers at the TSA checkpoint, heading straight for the sterile KCM, known crew member, and SIDA security identification display area access door. She swiped her federal smart card. The light blinked green, and the heavy magnetic lock disengaged with a satisfying clack. She pushed the door open, only to find her path abruptly blocked by a broad chest wrapped in a high-visibility yellow vest. "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hold it right there!" a voice barked. Nadine stopped, looking up into the flushed, irritated face of an airport security supervisor. His name tag read, Officer Bradley Hines. He was a heavily built man in his late 40s with a buzz cut and a posture that practically radiated unearned authority. His hand was resting squarely on the doorframe, physically barricading her entry. "Excuse me, Officer Hines," Nadine said, her voice calm, even, and thoroughly professional. "I need to access the sterile corridor. I'm on official federal business." Hines looked her up and down. His eyes lingered on her face, her hair, her civilian clothes, and then dropped down to the heavy black Pelican case in her hand. A distinct, patronizing smirk touched the corner of his lips. It was a look Nadine was intimately familiar with. It was the look of a man who had already assessed her demographics and decided she was beneath him. "Official federal business, huh?" Hines chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "That's a new one. Usually people just say they're late for their flight. Step back out into the main terminal, ma'am. This door is for authorized flight crew and badged airport personnel only." "I am badged personnel," Nadine said, maintaining eye contact. She reached down to her belt, unclipped her leather credential wallet, and flipped it open. The gold federal seal caught the overhead light. "Nadine Croft, FAA Lead Aviation Safety Inspector. My Form 110A gives me unrestricted access to the sterile area and the ramp." Hines didn't even look closely at the badge. He waved a dismissive hand. "Yeah, I've seen a lot of fake badges in my time, lady. You don't look like an FAA inspector. You look like a passenger trying to skip the line with a heavy piece of luggage." Nadine felt the first sharp spike of adrenaline hit her bloodstream. The clock was ticking. It was 4:18 p.m. Boarding for Flight 144 was about to begin. "Officer Hines, I am not asking for your permission." Nadine stated her tone, dropping an octave, replacing her polite demeanor with absolute steel. "I am informing you of my status. This is a federal credential. I am conducting a no-notice ramp inspection on Meridian Flight 144 at Gate D22. If you continue to block my path, you will be in direct violation of 49 U.S. Code, Section 46,301, interfering with a federal inspector." Hines bristled. The invocation of the law didn't intimidate him, it insulted him. In his mind, this was his airport, his checkpoint, his kingdom. And nobody, especially not this woman, was going to quote the law to him on his turf. "Listen to me very carefully." Hines leaned in his voice, dropping into a menacing whisper. "I don't care what kind of fake tin star you bought off the internet. You are not coming through this door. In fact, because you just tried to breach a secure area with fraudulent credentials, I'm going to have to detain you. Hand over the badge, put the case on the ground, and step against the wall." Nadine stared at him. It was a spectacular display of hubris ignorance and blatant profiling. "I will not hand over federal property to a local contractor," Nadine said, her voice ringing clear over the background noise of the terminal. Passengers waiting in the regular security line were starting to turn their heads, their attention caught by the escalating confrontation. "Last warning," Hines said, his hand dropping toward the radio on his hip. "Call your FSD," Nadine countered immediately. "Call David Corwin, the Federal Security Director for this airport. His office is in Terminal B. Ask him to run my badge number. Croft N-A-D-I-N-E. Badge number 884 Bravo Tango. Call him right now, Officer Hines, because every second you delay me is putting hundreds of lives at risk." Hines sneered. "I'm not calling the director for a line jumper." He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Supervisor Hines at Checkpoint Alpha 4. I have a 1015. Uncooperative female attempting to breach the sterile area with falsified federal credentials. Send 2 units. Nadine let out a slow, measured breath. She looked at her watch. 4:21 p.m. The gate was a 5-minute sprint from here. The plane was currently a loaded bomb waiting for a spark, and the man holding the match was standing right in front of her, drunk on his own microscopic sliver of power. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done," Nadine said softly. Against the wall. "Now," Hines ordered, stepping forward to physically intimidate her. Nadine didn't move. She stood her ground, her posture perfectly straight, her grip on the Pelican case unyielding. She knew the protocol. She knew that any physical resistance on her part, however justified, would give Hines the exact excuse he was looking for, to tackle her to the ground and waste another precious hour of her time. 2 more airport security officers, breathless and wide-eyed, jogged up to the KCM door. "What's the situation, boss?" one of them asked, eyeing Nadine nervously. "Suspect is trying to use a fake FAA badge to bypass security and bring an oversized, uninspected case into the terminal," Hines declared loudly, making sure the growing crowd of onlookers heard him. "Take her into custody. Escort her to the holding room at gate D22. It's the closest secure room. I want that case run through the explosive trace detector immediately. You are not opening this case," Nadine said sharply, her eyes locking onto the younger officers. "This case contains federally sealed diagnostic equipment. It is property of the United States government. Breaking those seals is a federal crime punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison. Do not touch it." The younger officers hesitated. Nadine's authoritative tone and exact knowledge of federal penal codes were deeply unsettling. People with fake badges usually panicked, cried, or tried to run. They didn't stand there citing prison sentences with ice-cold conviction. "Grab the case," Hines snapped. "I will carry it," Nadine interrupted smoothly. "I will walk with you to gate D22. That is exactly where I need to go anyway. But if you try to take this case from my physical possession, I will have you arrested for tampering with federal evidence." Hines glared at her, but something in her unwavering confidence made him second-guess a physical altercation in front of 50 cell phone cameras currently pointed their way from the TSA line. "Fine. Walk. We're going to gate D22. Then I'm calling the real feds to come deal with you." "Please do," Nadine replied. The bizarre procession moved rapidly through the terminal. Nadine walked in the center, flanked by the 2 junior officers, with Hines marching aggressively a few steps behind. As they approached gate D22, the situation became infinitely more complicated. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, Nadine could see the gleaming white fuselage of Meridian Airlines, Flight 144. The Boeing 787 was attached to the jet bridge. Baggage handlers were loading the final containers into the cargo hold. The fuel trucks were detaching. At the gate counter, gate agent Samantha Miller, a sharply dressed woman in her 30s with a headset clamped over one ear, was furiously tapping at her keyboard. A massive line of passengers was already snaking around the seating area, boarding passes in hand. "Now boarding Group 1 for Frankfurt," Samantha's voice echoed over the PA system. "Stop the boarding," Nadine said, immediately turning to Hines. "You need to tell the gate agent to halt boarding right now." "Shut up," Hines hissed, grabbing Nadine by the elbow and shoving her toward a nondescript keypad-locked door, marked "Authorized personnel only located just right of the gate counter." "Hey, Sam," Hines called out over the noise of the crowd. Samantha Miller looked up from her computer, her expression twisting into annoyance as she saw the security procession. "Bradley, what are you doing? We are in the middle of a delayed boarding. I don't have time for your drama." "Got a live one," Hines said, puffing out his chest. "Caught her trying to sneak through the crew door with a fake FAA ID. Trying to bring that massive black case onto your flight, probably. I need the security holding room." Samantha stopped typing. She looked at Nadine. Nadine looked back, her expression deadly serious. "Mamsta," Nadine said directly to Samantha, projecting her voice over the noise of the terminal. "My name is Nadine Croft. I am the lead aviation safety inspector for the FAA. That aircraft tail number N774AL has a critical hydraulic failure in the left main landing gear. The maintenance logs have been falsified. I am here to issue a federal grounding order. If you put passengers on that plane, you are acting as an accessory to criminal negligence." The gate area went dead silent. The passengers at the front of Group 1, who had been impatiently waiting to scan their tickets, froze. Samantha's eyes widened in alarm, but before she could process the gravity of Nadine's words, Hines let out a booming laugh. "Listen to her." Hines scoffed, looking around at the passengers to ensure he had an audience. "She's practically delusional. Lady, you watched too many movies. A fake badge and a crazy story aren't going to get you a free first-class seat to Germany. Get her in the room. Now." "Wait." Samantha hesitated, her hand hovering over the PA button. "Bradley, what if she's telling the truth? If there's something wrong with the plane?" "Sam, look at her." Hines threw his hands up in exasperation. "Does she look like a top federal investigator to you?" "She's wearing sneakers, for God's sake. It's a security risk. Print me the passenger manifest. I want to see if she's even booked on this flight." "I am not a passenger," Nadine reiterated forcefully, shrugging off Hines's grip on her arm. "And my footwear is designed for walking on oily tarmac, Officer Hines. Now, Samantha, I strongly advise you to pick up your radio and call the captain of that aircraft. Tell him the FAA is on site and the flight is indefinitely delayed." "Don't you dare!" Hines snapped at Samantha. "Meridian will have your head if you delay an international flight because of some crazy woman making a scene. Get her in the room, guys. Now." The two younger officers, clearly terrified of crossing their supervisor, grabbed Nadine by the shoulders and practically dragged her into the windowless holding room, slamming the heavy steel door behind them. The click of the deadbolt locking from the outside echoed like a gunshot in the small, brightly lit space. The security holding room at gate D22 was little more than a concrete box containing a metal table, 2 chairs and a security camera mounted in the corner. The walls were thick, muffling the sounds of the bustling terminal outside. Nadine stood in the center of the room, gently placing her Pelican case on the metal table. She wasn't panicking. Panic was a luxury reserved for people who didn't know how to handle a crisis. Nadine had spent 20 years handling crises. She checked her watch. 4:26 p.m. Boarding for a 787 took roughly 35 to 40 minutes. They were already rushing because of the weather delay. That meant she had, at most, 30 minutes before the cabin doors closed, the jet bridge pulled away, and the aircraft became the sole responsibility of the pilot in command. Once the plane pushed back from the gate, stopping it required a terrifying bureaucratic nightmare involving air traffic control, the tower, and potentially scrambling intercept jets if the pilot refused to comply with a radio order, which, if they were in on the maintenance cover-up, they might. She needed to get out of this room. The door handle rattled, and Officer Hines stepped inside, locking it behind him. He was alone. He walked over to the table, pulling out a chair, and sitting down, heavily crossing his arms over his chest. He looked thoroughly pleased with himself. "All right, let's cut the crap," Hines said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're going to open that case, and you're going to tell me exactly who you are and why you're trying to disrupt operations at my airport." "I have already told you exactly who I am," Nadine replied, remaining standing. She looked up at the security camera in the corner, noting the tiny red light indicating it was recording. "Perfect. And for the record, since I know that camera is rolling, I am formally stating that you, Officer Bradley Hines, are unlawfully detaining a federal agent. Furthermore, by preventing me from reaching the aircraft, you are willfully endangering the lives of everyone boarding Meridian Flight 144. Still playing the character, huh? Hines smirked, leaning back in his chair. You're good, I'll give you that. You almost had Sam out there convinced. But you don't fool me. I know how the real feds operate. They wear suits. They show up with local law enforcement escorts. They don't look like... well, they don't look like you. And what exactly do they look like, Bradley? Nadine asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Please enlighten me. Elaborate on your assessment for the security tape. Hines hesitated, suddenly aware of the trap she had laid for him. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. They look professional, not like some street-clothed civilian hauling a toolbox. This toolbox, Nadine tapped the reinforced lid of the Pelican case, contains an ultrasonic flaw detector and a digital borescope. Equipment required to prove that the hydraulic actuator on that aircraft is structurally compromised. An issue that Meridian Airlines' chief of maintenance actively forged documents to hide. By keeping me in this room, you are not protecting this airport. You are running interference for a corporate crime. Hines rolled his eyes. Right. A massive conspiracy, and you're the only one who can stop it. Look, I've already called the local PD. They're on their way to arrest you for trespassing and using forged federal documents. So you can either wait for them, or you can open the case now. And maybe I tell them you cooperated. Nadine ignored him. She reached into her blazer pocket. Hines flinched, his hand flying to his belt, but Nadine slowly withdrew her personal cell phone. Put that away, Hines barked. No phones. You refused to call the Federal Security Director, Nadine said, unlocking the screen. So I am going to call my boss, the administrator of the FAA in Washington, D.C., and then he is going to call the Department of Homeland Security, who oversees your entire private security contract. And by the time the dust settles, you will be lucky to find a job as a mall cop. Before she could dial, a loud, rapid knocking came from the heavy steel door. Hines stood up, clearly irritated, and unlocked it. Standing in the doorway was a tall, distinguished-looking man in his late 50s, wearing the crisp, immaculate uniform of a commercial airline captain. 4 gold stripes adorned his epaulets. His silver hair was perfectly combed, but his expression was a mixture of deep annoyance and slight apprehension. What the hell is going on here? Bradley. The man demanded, his voice a deep baritone. My gate agent is having a panic attack. Boarding is backed up to the food court, and I'm being told there's some lunatic in here screaming about my airplane. Hines immediately straightened up, his entire demeanor, shifting from arrogant bully to sycophantic subordinate. Captain Davies, I apologize for the disruption, sir. We caught this woman trying to breach the secure zone. She's making up some crazy story about your landing gear and claiming to be the FAA. We've got her contained. Captain Richard Davies stepped fully into the room, the door clicking shut behind him. He looked at Nadine. He took in her civilian clothes, the heavy black case, and the unyielding, furious expression on her face. Nadine looked back at him. She recognized his name from the flight manifest she had reviewed in the car. Captain Richard Davies, a 20-year veteran of Meridian Airlines. Captain Davies, Nadine said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. My name is Nadine Croft, lead ASI for the FAA. Your aircraft's left main gear actuator failed its pressure test at 0200 hours this morning. Your maintenance director forged the sign-off to keep you on schedule. If you take this aircraft into the sky, it will not survive the landing. Davies stared at her. For a split second, Nadine saw something flicker in the pilot's eyes. It wasn't the confusion she expected. It wasn't the outrage of a man defending his perfectly maintained aircraft. It was a flash of raw, unfiltered panic. She's lying, Captain. Hines quickly interjected, trying to regain control of the room. She's got a fake badge. I'm waiting on the police right now. Just go back to the cockpit, sir. We'll have this mess cleared out in 5 minutes and you can push back on time. Davies swallowed hard. He looked from the heavy Pelican case on the table to Nadine's steady, unblinking gaze. He wiped a sudden bead of sweat from his forehead. Right, Captain Davies said, his voice suddenly sounding an octave higher, lacking the deep authority it possessed just seconds ago. Right. Bradley, keep her in here. Do not let her out under any circumstances. I need to get this plane in the air. We are already behind schedule." Davies turned on his heel and grabbed the door handle. "Captain!" Nadine shouted the sudden volume, making both men jump. She stepped toward him, but Hines shoved his arm out, blocking her path. "If you walk out that door and close that cockpit," Nadine warned, her voice trembling with restrained fury, "you are intentionally flying a compromised aircraft. I will not just ground your plane, Davies. I will see your pilot's license revoked permanently, and I will see you brought up on federal manslaughter charges if anyone gets hurt. You know the gear is bad, don't you?" "You knew." Davies froze in the doorway, his back to her. His knuckles were white where he gripped the handle. He didn't turn around. "Keep her locked in here, Bradley," Davies muttered over his shoulder. "That's an order." He yanked the door open and disappeared into the terminal, the door slamming shut and locking once again. Nadine stood in the center of the room, her mind racing. The situation had just escalated from a bureaucratic nightmare to a horrific conspiracy. The pilot knew. The pilot was in on it, desperate to get the plane out of U.S. jurisdiction before the FAA could officially flag it. She looked at her watch. 4:31 p.m. Well, Hines said, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across his face as he turned back to her. "Looks like the captain doesn't want to talk to you either. Have a seat, Inspector. You're going to be here a while." Nadine looked at Hines, realizing that playing by the rules was no longer an option. The plane was boarding. The pilot was compromised. The security guard was a power-tripping obstacle. She looked at her heavy reinforced Pelican case. It wasn't just filled with diagnostic equipment. It also contained something else, something she only used when all other options had failed. "Officer Hines," Nadine said, her voice dropping to a whisper, so cold it made the hairs on his arms stand up. "I strongly suggest you step away from that door." Hines took a step forward, his hand dropping to the heavy Maglite flashlight on his belt. The arrogance in his eyes had hardened into something far more dangerous, the desperate pride of a man who realized he was losing control of the situation and had decided to double down. "I don't care what you have in that box, lady," Hines warned, his voice tight. "You touch anything that looks like a weapon, and I will put you on the concrete." Nadine didn't blink. She flicked the heavy titanium latches of the Pelican 1510 case. They snapped open with a sharp, synchronized crack that echoed off the concrete walls. She didn't reach for a weapon. She reached past the carefully foam-cut compartments, holding her digital borescope and ultrasonic floor detector, pulling out a heavy matte black handheld radio. It wasn't a standard walkie-talkie. It was an ICOM ICA-14 VHF aviation airband transceiver. "You think a walkie-talkie is going to scare me?" Hines sneered, relaxing his grip on the flashlight. "I already told you the local police are on their way." "I am not calling the police." Bradley Fortelfeld. Nadine said, her thumb spinning the frequency dial to 121.650 megahertz Dallas/Fort Worth Airport ground control. "I am calling the people who actually control this airport." She pressed the push-to-talk button on the side of the radio. "DFW ground. This is Federal Aviation Administration. Lead Inspector Nadine Croft, credential 884 Bravo Tango. I am transmitting a priority Alpha grounding order." The radio hissed with static for a microsecond before the confused voice of a ground controller crackled through the speaker. "Station transmitting, say again. This is DFW ground. Who is on this frequency? DFW ground. This is FAA Inspector Croft." Nadine repeated, enunciating every syllable with crystal-clear precision. "I am currently detained in a security holding room at Gate D-22. I am issuing an immediate mandatory ground stop for Meridian Airlines Flight 144, a Boeing 787 tail number, November 774 Alpha Lima. The aircraft has suffered a critical hydraulic failure and falsified maintenance logs. Revoke their clearance immediately. Hines's face drained of color. He finally realized exactly what she was doing. She was bypassing his entire chain of command and speaking directly to the men and women in the tower who controlled the movement of every single piece of metal on the tarmac. "Give me that!" Hines lunged across the metal table, swiping at the radio. Nadine pivoted smoothly, using her shoulder to absorb his momentum and effortlessly stepping out of his reach. She kept the transmit button pressed. "DFW ground. Be advised the pilot in command, Captain Richard Davies, is aware of the mechanical failure and is attempting to push back regardless. Do not let that aircraft move." The radio crackled again, this time with a different, much deeper voice, the tower supervisor. "Inspector Croft, this is DFW Tower Super. We copy your transmission, but we need secondary verification of your badge number before we can issue a hard stop on a heavy international flight. Please stand by." Before Nadine could reply, a third voice sliced through the frequency. The audio was pristine, coming from the multi-million-dollar communications suite of a Boeing 787. "Ground, this is Meridian. 144. Heavy Captain Davies's voice sounded remarkably calm, though Nadine could hear the slight tremor of adrenaline underneath. Disregard that last transmission. We have an unhinged passenger, making a scene at the gate with a handheld scanner. Airport security has her in custody. We are buttoned up, the tug is attached, and we are ready for pushback." Nadine cursed under her breath. Davies was playing his hand brilliantly. Without visual confirmation of her badge, the tower was caught between a highly respected veteran captain and an unverified voice on an emergency frequency. In aviation protocol was king, and Davies was relying on the bureaucracy to buy him the 2 minutes he needed to get off the gate. Once he was on the taxiway, the jurisdiction shifted, and grounding him became infinitely more difficult. "Meridian 144, copy that. We are holding your pushback clearance for just 1 moment while we verify this transmission," the tower supervisor replied, sounding torn. Hines lunged again, and this time his heavy hand clamped down on Nadine's wrist. He squeezed hard, trying to force her to drop the radio. "I said, give it to me. You're making a terroristic threat on a federal frequency. You're going to federal prison. Let go of me, you absolute fool." Nadine gritted her teeth, refusing to drop the radio, shifting her weight to maintain her balance. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the holding room flew open. 2 uniformed officers from the DFW Airport Police Department burst into the room, hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. The lead officer, a tall woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun, took in the scene the massive security guard, grappling with a sharply dressed woman holding an aviation radio. "Hey, separate right now," the lead officer shouted. Her name tag read Sergeant Jenkins. Hines immediately let go of Nadine, taking a step back and pointing a thick, trembling finger at her. "Arrest her, Jenkins. She's got a fake badge she's resisting, and she just hijacked the ATC frequency to make a bomb threat against Meridian 144. Jenkins frowned, looking at Nadine. Mom put the radio down on the table, slowly. Nadine placed the radio down, but immediately reached for her belt. Both officers tensed. "My name is Nadine Croft," she said, pulling her leather credential wallet and tossing it onto the metal table, letting it slide directly in front of Sergeant Jenkins. "I am the lead aviation safety inspector for the FAA's Critical Incident Division. Call the Federal Security Director right now and run the chip in that card." Jenkins looked at the badge. She didn't just look at the gold shield. She looked at the holographic overlay, the microprinting, and the encrypted PIV chip embedded in the plastic. She had seen enough fake IDs in her career to know one instantly. This wasn't one. The weight, the texture, the intricate watermarks. It was undeniably, terrifyingly real. Jenkins looked up, her expression shifting from cautious authority to sheer horror as she realized what Hines had done. "Bradley," Jenkins whispered, her voice laced with venom. "What the hell did you do?" "It's a fake Sarah," Hines pleaded, though his voice cracked. "Look at her. She doesn't." "Shut your mouth," Jenkins snapped, pulling her own radio. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Jenkins. Priority 1. Contact DFW Tower Supervisor immediately. Confirm the identity of FAA Inspector Nadine Croft badge 884-Bravo-Tango. Tell them her presence is verified by APD on site and her grounding order is legitimate. Do it now." Nadine didn't wait for the confirmation. She snatched her badge off the table, clipped it to her blazer, and grabbed the heavy Pelican case. She looked at her watch. 4:37 p.m. "The jet bridge is already disconnected," Nadine said to Jenkins, her voice returning to its calm, authoritative baseline. "I need ramp access. Now." "Follow me," Jenkins said, completely ignoring Hines, who was now standing completely frozen in the center of the room. Nadine and Jenkins bolted out of the holding room. The gate area was a ghost town. The massive line of passengers was gone, locked safely inside the doomed aircraft. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Nadine saw her worst nightmare unfolding. The jet bridge had been pulled back. The massive 500,000-pound Boeing 787 was disconnected from the terminal. Beneath the nose of the aircraft, a massive low-profile pushback tractor. A tug was hooked to the nose gear, its diesel engine belching a puff of black smoke as it prepared to shove the plane backward onto the active taxiway. "He's pushing back," Nadine yelled over the terminal noise. "He's ignoring the tower. Where are the ramp stairs?" "This way," Jenkins shouted, leading Nadine toward an unmarked door near the window. Jenkins swiped her police badge, threw the door open, and bounded down a flight of concrete stairs. Nadine followed, the heavy Pelican case banging against her leg. They hit the bottom of the stairs, and Jenkins pushed open the heavy steel security doors leading out to the ramp. The wall of sound hit them like a physical blow. The tarmac was a deafening, chaotic expanse of screaming jet engines, the heavy rumble of baggage carts, and the smell of atomized Jet A fuel. Rain was beginning to mist down, slickening the concrete and making the blinding floodlights reflect off the ground in a dizzying array of colors. "Stop that tug!" Nadine yelled over the roar of the engines. She broke into a sprint, completely abandoning the safety lines painted on the concrete. She ran directly toward the nose of Meridian 144, the massive Rolls-Royce Trent. 1,000 engines on the Boeing 787 were spooling up, producing a high-pitched, bone-rattling whine that shook the rainwater off the fuselage. Captain Davies was desperate. If he could just get the aircraft off the gate and into the taxiway line, he could claim radio failure or blame the weather for misinterpreting the ground stop order. Once he was in the air, the falsified logs would be a problem for the German authorities to find upon landing, if they even checked. Underneath the nose of the colossal aircraft, a ramp worker named Tom Harris sat in the open cab of the massive pushback tug. He had his heavy noise-cancelling headset clamped over his ears, connected via a long, brightly colored umbilical cord, plugged directly into the intercom jack on the belly of the aircraft. "All right, Tom, let's get moving." Captain Davies's voice echoed in Tom's headset. "Clear to push. Brakes released. Give it some juice, we're behind schedule." "Copy that, Captain," Tom replied, shifting the heavy tug into reverse and gently applying the throttle. The massive tires of the tractor dug into the wet concrete, and the 500,000-pound airplane slowly, infinitesimally began to inch backward. Suddenly, out of his peripheral vision, Tom saw a blur of motion. A woman in a navy blazer was sprinting across the active ramp, directly into the danger zone of the aircraft. She was moving with absolutely zero hesitation, holding something high in the air. Right behind her, an airport police officer was running one hand on her radio, the other, pointing frantically at the tug. Tom instinctively slammed his foot on the brake. The tug lurched to a halt, the heavy steel tow bar groaning in protest as it arrested the momentum of the massive jet. "What the hell was that?" Tom Davies barked over the intercom. "I didn't tell you to stop. Keep moving." "Captain, we have a breach on the ramp," Tom replied, his voice spiking with adrenaline as he watched the woman run directly toward him. "Someone's running straight at the aircraft." Nadine reached the tug, her chest heaving, the rain plastering her hair to her forehead. She stood directly in front of the massive wheels of the pushback tractor, planting her feet. She held her FAA credential wallet open, pressing the gold badge flat against the windshield of the tug's cab so Tom could clearly see the federal seal illuminated by the floodlights. She then raised her arms, crossing them in an X above her head, the universal undeniable aviation hand signal for emergency stop. Tom's eyes went wide. Every ramp worker was drilled on federal authority. You didn't mess with the FAA. "Captain." Tom swallowed hard, keying his mic. "It's not a passenger. It's an FAA inspector. She's standing right in front of my rig. She's giving me the emergency stop signal. I can't move the aircraft, sir." Up in the cockpit, 50 feet above the tarmac, Captain Richard Davies stared out the side window. He could see the flashing lights of Sergeant Jenkins's police cruiser speeding toward the nose of the plane, and he could see Nadine Croft standing directly in front of the tug, completely immovable. His gamble had failed. The tower had likely verified her identity. The police were on the ramp. It was over. Run her over if you have to. "Tom, that's an order." Davies yelled a desperate, irrational panic, finally breaking through his professional facade. "Push the damn plane." Tom recoiled in his seat, horrified. "Sir, I absolutely will not do that." Nadine didn't wait to see what the tug driver would do. She ducked under the heavy tow bar, the deafening scream of the jet engines pressing against her eardrums. She moved to the belly of the aircraft, right next to the nose gear strut. She found the ground communication intercom panel. She unclipped Tom's headset cord from the jack. Tom yelped in protest from the cab, but Nadine ignored him. She opened her Pelican case, pulling out a specialized heavy-duty headset with an industrial microphone. It was specifically designed to interface with the external comms ports of commercial airliners. She slammed the plug into the jack and clamped the headset over her ears instantly, muting the deafening roar of the engines and replacing it with the heavy, frantic breathing of Captain Davies on the line. "Captain Davies," Nadine said, her voice eerily calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "You have no right to be down there." Davies screamed, his voice distorting over the comms. "Get away from my aircraft. I am the pilot in command, and I am ordering you off the ramp. You are no longer the pilot in command." Nadine stated her tone, cold and definitive. "By the authority vested in me, by the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, and under Title 49 of the United States Code, I am formally issuing a grounding order for aircraft N774AL. Cut your engines, Richard." "You're crazy," Davies breathed heavily. "The plane is fine. The maintenance log was signed off. You're ruining my career over a paperwork glitch." A pressure differential failure on a primary hydraulic seal is not a glitch. Nadine counted her eyes, locking onto the massive left landing gear 50 feet away, knowing exactly where the hidden fracture lay. "If you take this plane to 35,000 feet, that seal will blow. When you try to land in Frankfurt, the gear will not deploy. You will kill 280 innocent people, your crew and yourself, just to save Meridian Airlines a fiscal quarter penalty. Silence hung on the line, save for the hum of the aircraft's internal avionics. "The tower has verified my badge." Nadine continued driving the final nail into the coffin. "The airport police are currently surrounding the nose of your aircraft. The Federal Security Director is walking onto the ramp right now. If you spool those engines up even 1% more, you will be arrested by federal marshals the moment you cut the fuel. Cut the engines. Now." For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The massive Rolls-Royce engines continued to whine, fighting against the tug's brakes. Nadine stood completely still beneath the belly of the metal leviathan, trusting entirely in the psychological pressure she had just applied. Then, slowly, the pitch of the engines began to drop. The bone-rattling whine lowered into a heavy hum and then down to a sputtering spin-down. Davies was cutting the fuel. "Engines are spooling down." Davies whispered over the intercom, his voice completely defeated. "May God have mercy on both of us, Inspector." "He won't need to," Nadine replied sharply, "because the plane is safely on the ground." She ripped the headset off the sudden silence of the dying engines, washing over the tarmac, replaced only by the sound of the falling rain and the approaching sirens of an entire fleet of airport police and fire rescue vehicles. Nadine reached into her blazer pocket. She pulled out 2 heavy, bright red, federally serialized tags. They were lockdown tags. She walked over to the nose gear strut, wrapped the heavy steel cables around the towing mechanism, and locked them in place. The tags read in bold black lettering, "Aircraft grounded. U.S. Federal Aviation Administration. Removal is a federal offense." She stepped back from the aircraft, wiping the rain from her eyes, and looked up at the cockpit window. She couldn't see Davies, but she knew he was up there staring down at the end of his entire life's work. Sergeant Jenkins jogged up to her, breathless, shielding her radio from the rain. "Tower confirms," Jenkins said, shouting slightly out of habit, though the engines were now dead. "The ground stop is hard. The FBI is being notified, and Meridian's corporate office is blowing up my dispatcher's phone." "Let them blow it up," Nadine said, picking up her Pelican case. The adrenaline was finally beginning to recede, leaving a cold, sharp exhaustion in its wake. "We need to get boarding stairs to the front port door, get the passengers off safely. And Sergeant—" "Yes, ma'am. I want Captain Davies detained the moment his feet touch the tarmac," Nadine said firmly. "And I want Officer Bradley Hines brought to the FSD's office. He has a lot of explaining to do." The heavy motorized mobile stairs slowly rolled up to the forward port door of the Boeing 787. As the cabin door swung open, the first wave of passengers spilled out onto the metal grating, groaning in sheer frustration. They were complaining loudly to the flight attendants about missed connections, ruined vacations, and the incompetence of Meridian Airlines. They clutched their neck pillows and duty-free bags, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were 50 minutes away from being a smoldering headline on the international news. Nadine stood at the base of the stairs, the rain finally beginning to taper off into a cold drizzle. She watched them descend, feeling a profound, quiet relief that she had managed to keep them on the ground. Behind the stream of irritated passengers, Captain Richard Davies emerged. He was no longer the immaculate, authoritative figure who had dismissed her in the holding room. His tie was loosened, his face was pale, and his shoulders sagged under the invisible, crushing weight of a ruined career. Waiting for him at the bottom of the stairs was Sergeant Jenkins and 2 federal agents who had just arrived via a blazing motorcade onto the tarmac. "Richard Davies," one of the agents said, stepping forward, "you're under arrest for reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and operating an aircraft under knowingly critical mechanical failure." Jenkins smoothly clicked the steel handcuffs over Davies's wrists. The metallic sound was sharp and definitive. Davies looked up, locking eyes with Nadine. The arrogance was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic need to justify the unjustifiable. "You don't understand, Inspector," Davies stammered, his voice trembling as the rain soaked his silver hair. "It wasn't just me. It was Robert Carmichael, the Vice President of Flight Operations at Meridian. He called me on my private cell 30 minutes before boarding. He told me if I grounded this plane, my pension was gone. They were going to blame the hangar mechanics and fire me for insubordination. I was trapped." Nadine stared at him, her expression devoid of any sympathy. "A pension doesn't spend well in a casket, Richard, and it certainly doesn't justify murdering 280 people. You made your choice the second you ignored my badge." As the agents led Davies toward a waiting SUV, a sleek black government sedan pulled up to the nose of the aircraft. David Corwin, the Federal Security Director for DFW Airport, stepped out. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, wearing a damp trench coat. "Inspector Croft," Corwin said, walking briskly toward her, sidestepping the massive puddles on the concrete. "I got your priority Alpha call. The FBI is raiding Meridian's corporate maintenance hub in Atlanta as we speak. Carmichael won't have time to shred a single document." "Good," Nadine said, crouching down beside her Pelican case, "because I have the physical proof right here." She snapped the latches open and pulled out the ultrasonic floor detector. She attached a heavily shielded transducer cable to the main console and walked over to the massive complex steel structure of the 787's left main landing gear. She applied a clear acoustic couplant gel to the titanium housing of the primary hydraulic actuator, the exact spot the whistleblower's encrypted files had pinpointed. Corwin leaned in as Nadine pressed the transducer against the cold metal. The digital screen on her diagnostic unit flared to life. A flat green line suddenly spiked into a jagged, massive red mountain on the graph. "Look at that," Nadine pointed to the screen. "A Class 4 micro-fissure spanning 6 inches across the internal high-pressure seal. It's completely invisible to the naked eye, but at 35,000 feet, when the ambient temperature drops to minus 60 degrees and the internal pressure maxes out, this entire housing would have shattered like glass." Corwin let out a slow, breathy whistle, staring at the red spike on the screen. "My God. You weren't exaggerating. They were going to fly a ticking time bomb. It's a corporate cover-up, David," Nadine said, packing up her equipment. "And your security supervisor almost acted as their chief enforcer." An hour later, the buzzing chaos of the tarmac had been replaced by the dead, sterile silence of the Federal Security Director's private conference room inside Terminal D. Bradley Hines sat alone at a long mahogany table. He had been stripped of his high-visibility yellow vest, his radio, and his airport security badge. He looked physically shrunken, staring at his hands with the terrified realization of a man whose entire worldview had just violently collapsed. The door opened, and Nadine walked in, followed closely by Corwin. She still wore her damp blazer, and she carried the heavy black Pelican case that Hines had mocked just 2 hours ago. She set it on the table with a heavy thud. Hines flinched. He looked up at Nadine, his face flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and deep existential dread. "Inspector Croft, ma'am." Hines stammered, his voice practically a whisper. I was just following checkpoint protocols. You didn't look like... you weren't wearing a suit. You didn't have an armed escort. I just thought... You didn't think Bradley." Nadine interrupted her voice, a low, lethal hum. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. That is precisely the problem. You looked at a black woman in civilian clothes and made a split-second biased calculation about my worth, my authority, and my intelligence. You decided based on nothing but your own prejudice that I couldn't possibly be who I said I was. Hines swallowed hard, unable to meet her eyes. I thought you were a threat to the airport. No. Nadine leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. You thought I was an easy target to bully so you could feel powerful, and because of your fragile ego, you physically barricaded a federal agent, ignored a priority threat warning, and actively aided a corporate conspiracy that was minutes away from killing hundreds of people. You didn't secure this airport today, Bradley. You weaponized your own ignorance. Corwin stepped forward, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table toward Hines. Your contract with the airport authority is terminated effective immediately, Corwin stated coldly. Furthermore, the Transportation Security Administration and the Department of Homeland Security are opening a formal inquiry into your actions. You are permanently blacklisted from holding any security clearance in the United States. Collect your personal items and get out of my airport. Hines opened his mouth to argue, to beg to offer some kind of apology, but the absolute, icy finality in Nadine's eyes stopped him dead. He stood up, trembling slightly, and walked out of the room, leaving his false authority behind forever. Nadine turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The flashing blue and red lights of the emergency vehicles still illuminated the tarmac around the grounded Meridian 787. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from the FAA administrator in Washington. Meridian CEO Gregory Lawson just resigned. DOJ is stepping in. Entire 787 fleet is grounded for ultrasonic inspection. You saved a lot of lives today, Croft. Take a few days off. Nadine locked her phone and slipped it back into her pocket. She grabbed the handle of her Pelican case, the wheels gliding smoothly over the carpet as she headed for the door. She wasn't going to take a few days off. There was always another plane, another cut corner, and another fight waiting just over the horizon. And she was exactly the right woman for the job. Nadine Croft's story is a chilling high-stakes reminder of exactly what happens when unchecked ego and blind prejudice collide with raw, uncompromising expertise. It proves that true authority doesn't always wear a tailored suit, and real-life heroes are the ones who refuse to back down when the lives of hundreds are on the line. Never judge a book by its cover, because the person you're underestimating might just be the only one who can save you. If this intense, real-life aviation thriller kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of everyday heroes fighting the system.